I think the guy who created Takeshi's Castle is one of the greatest film directors of all time. Just wanted to let that hang for a bit. Takeshi's Castle is a complicated show to explain. It's a Japanese game show based around doing a whole bunch of human obstacle courses. The show starts with a group of roughly 100 people, and then they go through all of these different games to eliminate contestants. And the ones who make it to the end don't even win by default. They also have to beat a final boss. So, most episodes of Takeshi's Castle don't even have winners. They just have people who lose less. And one of those guys you need to defeat to win, that's the creator of the show, the guy it gets its name from, Takeshi Kitano. If you've ever seen a piece of media make a joke about how wacky and confusing Japanese game shows are, it's probably because they saw Takeshi's Castle and didn't know how to write jokes. Takeshi's Castle is huge, bigger than you might even realize. The general idea of people trying to survive and run through a giant obstacle course, that is literally Takeshi's Castle. There isn't a complicated history or anything like that as far as I can tell. Let me pull back the video essay curtain a bit. Whenever I try research stuff for a video, it's really difficult to find the origin of things. There's multiple people doing the same thing at the same time, so it's not obvious who got there first. But no, that's not the case here. That idea of a human obstacle course, that's literally Takeshi's Castle. If it never existed, you wouldn't have Total Wipeout, Ninja Warrior, even Fall Guys straight up steals a game from Takeshi's Castle. Are you serious? Did I lose? Growing up, I watched so many episodes of Takeshi's Castle. Anytime I was sick and off school, I would watch 6 episodes in a row, because they used to broadcast during the middle of the day. I think their main audience was 60-year-olds and also me. You haven't realized this because I've been hiding it, but the footage I'm using right now is from the UK broadcast of Takeshi's Castle, where it's all been re-edited and Craig Charles from Red Dwarf does the voiceover.
This is Takeshi's Castle, and our contestants are in big trouble.
Being a fan of this show in the UK was crazy, because I only found out years and years later that Takeshi's Castle was only on the air in Japan for 5 years, and they only ever made 133 episodes. That's not a lot for a game show, especially one that's this influential. And that's kind of the thing about Takeshi Kitano. He has done so much in his life that creating Takeshi's Castle is a footnote. He's designed an NES game, he was also in a video game, this is footage from Yakuza 6. He had a whole career as a stand-up comedian before any of this, and he hosts so many Japanese TV shows. In 2023, he even rebooted Takeshi's Castle as this giant floating head, who looks like he's about to ask me to solve some maths problems. Kitano is one of the most popular celebrities in Japan today. He even goes by 2 different names depending on what he's working on. Whenever it involves his TV or comedian personality, he's usually credited as Beat Takeshi, but when he's working on more serious stuff like his films, it's Takeshi Kitano. He's got work on the radio, he's published books, he's a musician, he's even acted in loads of big films, both in English and Japanese. And Kitano is also himself one of the greatest film directors of all time. What I'm trying to say is, Donald Glover doesn't really have shit on this guy. Oh, what? You're only good at music, writing, and acting? Okay. If there's one quality that defines Takeshi Kitano, it's that he's not very easy to define. Kitano is infamous for taking whatever people expect and then doing the exact opposite. You don't make Takeshi's Castle by trying to play it safe. And what I want to make super clear is that there is no English equivalent of Takeshi Kitano. You cannot understand this guy by comparing him to other people. He is one of the most unique celebrities on Earth. When Kitano started his career, it was as a stand-up comedian. And in the book Kitano Takeshi, Aaron Gerow describes his style of comedy like this. Kitano's targets were those who had enjoyed respect in post-war society, like the elderly and young women. Which does make him sound really edgy, and it probably was because it was like the 1970s. But one thing I love about this section of the book is that over the next few pages, Gerow quotes a bunch of respected people and what they have to say about Kitano's style of stand-up. And there's this bit where someone says he's saying "F off granny," but in the end, he's charming. If he didn't have that, it just wouldn't be funny. It feels like Kitano is this guy who shouldn't be likable, but he has so much charisma that it just kind of works. And the most fascinating thing about Kitano is, he has stories like this throughout his entire career. In 1986, a weekly gossip magazine called Friday published a story about Kitano cheating on his wife with another woman. And apparently the journalist who broke this story did some shady shit, like he quote-unquote physically harmed the woman to get that information. So, what did Kitano do? The only reasonable thing. He gathered 11 other people, stormed the offices of that magazine, attacked the editor, and broke as much shit as they could. Kitano got charged with 6 months in prison because of it. And can you guess who the public sided with during all of this? Kitano, obviously. Come on, man, you really gotta start paying attention. Everybody agreed the magazine deserved it. And guess how I found out about this story? I read an article about it, published 37 years later, in the same magazine. There's footage of a press conference he did after all of this to apologize, and in it, he's making the journalists laugh. That is the type of guy Takeshi Kitano is. He's famous for building a reputation for doing whatever he wants, and then after building that reputation, doing the exact opposite of it. My favorite story like this is the time Kitano acted in this really great Japanese movie from 1983, Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence. It's got David Bowie and Ryuichi Sakamoto from YMO, and a lot of it's in English. It's super good. But the story goes, the movie's set in a World War II prisoner of war camp, and Kitano's playing quite a serious role in the movie. He's one of the main sergeants in the camp, and he does a really good job if I'm being honest. But when this movie released in Japan, Kitano went to go see it, and whenever he appeared on screen, audiences just couldn't stop laughing. He wasn't doing anything funny, but people couldn't stop seeing him as that comedian who hosted a bunch of TV shows. So, what did Takeshi Kitano do? The only reasonable thing. He doubled down. I was devastated by their reaction, because this character was supposed to be very intimidating and mysterious, not somebody to be laughed at. After that, I only accepted parts playing serious, dark, evil characters. It took 10 years of my playing those types of roles before I was perceived as being a serious actor. So do you get why I'm so fascinated with this guy, who is famous in Japan for being this charismatic daytime TV celebrity? But then he pulls all of this shit, he made Takeshi's Castle, he acts opposite Keanu Reeves in a movie, and he also somehow makes some of the best films I've ever seen. But his reputation in the West is kind of
Imagine one man with the talents of Jim Carrey, Howard Stern, and Martin Scorsese. His name is Beat Takeshi.
Remember earlier when I said Japan has two different versions of Kitano. There's Beat Takeshi, the TV comedian, and then there's Takeshi Kitano, the serious film director. And while he tries to keep the two personalities pretty separate, it doesn't always work. In Japan, Kitano's movies aren't really like that big of a deal. Why would you go pay money to go watch one of his movies? The guy's on TV every day. Because of that, Kitano's movies don't really make that much money. His main audience is Japanese, and for at least the first decade of his career as a director, they were going into Kitano's films and disliking them, because they were expecting his TV personality. The thing is though, because Kitano's movies don't make that much money, he doesn't get a big budget either, which means he has a lot of creative control over the final product. He gets to take risks that nobody else can. But with one guy involved in so many different areas, from directing to acting to editing, and he's a comedian celebrity, on paper, it does kinda sound like a recipe for failure. His first two directed movies, Violent Cop and Boiling Point, didn't even get good reviews from Japanese critics either. And they're pretty good movies. People just weren't willing to read his work as art yet. So it makes sense why Kitano was trying to keep his TV personality separate from his film one in Japan. He wanted to be taken seriously. But where this gets more complicated is Kitano's fourth directed movie, Sonatine. It's an incredibly violent Yakuza movie from 1993, but it was also Kitano's breakthrough into the Western film scene. Sonatine is why people talk about Kitano today, at least in English, and it is well respected, not just with critics, but even other artists. I remember years ago reading a list of Frank Ocean's top 100 favorite films. It was in some zine he made, and then boom, sandwiched right between The Seventh Seal and Paths of Glory, there was Sonatine. The issue though is that, as Western fans, we don't really have any experience with the comedian side of Takeshi Kitano. They literally edited him out of Takeshi's Castle. Nobody knows who Takeshi is, and it's his castle. In Japan, Kitano was deliberately trying to split his image into two halves, so people would be forced to take his film work seriously. But that doesn't necessarily mean the serious film version of him is the real Takeshi Kitano either. It's just another constructed identity for audiences. So when Kitano's films immigrated overseas, we only got that over-the-top serious version of him. We got Takeshi Kitano, the auteur. I think this is one of the worst things that could have happened to him. Kitano's image got reduced to this simple idea of good and artistic. There were a lot of critics trying to push back against this, but I guess the appeal of being a foreign Asian director was just too powerful, especially one that's famous in his own country. And now, because of that, a lot of people think of Kitano as a classic Japanese director, when it's pretty obvious his entire career is about not trying to come across like that. Where are the Takeshi Kitano video essays? And why are there 500 on David Fincher? It's kind of a shame because there's really nothing else like a Kitano film. So I want to talk to you about one of his movies, an incredibly violent movie that he directed, wrote, edited, and starred in, Sonatine. But before we can talk about this violent Yakuza movie from 1993, there's an important question I need you to answer. Do you like Studio Ghibli films? When you think of your favorite parts of a Studio Ghibli film, yeah, I'm gonna keep saying Ghibli, I'm willing to bet music is somewhere on that list. Ghibli works with a lot of talented musicians, but the most iconic by far, the one that everybody associates with that Ghibli sound, is Joe Hisaishi. And you might be surprised to learn, Hisaishi has made a lot of music that is not for Studio Ghibli, like almost everything in his 50-year-long career. Which is weird because a lot of people don't seem to know this, and they've made video essays about him, and they never mention anything else he did. It's in the second paragraph on his Wikipedia page. Think about all the stuff you associate with Ghibli and Hisaishi's music. The scene with the umbrella in My Neighbor Totoro, the main piano theme from Spirited Away. Hisaishi's music is this beautiful mixture of sincere and incredibly piercing. It always manages to get underneath your skin and emotionally connect with you when you're least expecting it. And those Ghibli films know this. Hayao Miyazaki is very aware of how tender and affectionate Hisaishi's music is, and he always uses it to make you feel the same richness and appreciation of life that his characters do. So, what would happen if you took that warm, fuzzy feeling and applied it to someone who had, you know, maybe given up on life, who feels like there's nothing left to live for? Well, about 7 Takeshi Kitano movies, it turns out. Sonatine is the second time these guys ever worked together, and the 4th movie Kitano ever directed. Hisaishi did the score for all of these movies, and the only reason he stopped doing them is because he got too expensive for Kitano to keep hiring, which is some of the realest shit I've ever read. In all of these movies, but Sonatine especially, this isn't a case of a director just picking the right music to me. It's a fundamental part of the movie's character. There is no movie if you take the music out. It's like the glue that ties everything together. Which is important because Sonatine is very different from how you might be expecting a Yakuza film like this to be. The film's general premise is this Yakuza sergeant, Murakawa, played by Kitano, is starting to get disillusioned with life. And I don't mean like the life of crime, I mean just life. It's like existing in the world in general is too much for him. But how do they introduce you to Murakawa? What's the first actual shot of the movie? Some random guy. Kitano enters out of focus, and he's not even in the light in this scene. Already, the movie's telling you everything you need to know about Murakawa. He doesn't really fit in with other people, and his presence is always kind of a disturbance to nature. The rest of the opening builds on this too. Everything just feels wrong. These guys are walking through a mahjong parlor, but the place is dead. Nobody else is there. And look at this scene that plays afterwards where Kitano's walking through the street. It starts off like a normal shot, but all of this is actually from the perspective of inside a cafe window. All of the audio that's playing in this scene is just conversations being had by the cafe's customers. The movie's deliberately putting layers between you and Murakawa. It's trying its hardest to not let you connect with him. So when you hear Joe Hisaishi's beautiful soundtrack, something that makes you want to celebrate life, what do you see? A lonely man, and shit tons of brutal violence. In Ghibli films, they're so upfront about what every character is feeling, and the music's used to help you get into the same frame of mind. In Kitano's movies though, his characters are always hiding how they really feel. Most of the time, Kitano's characters are deeply insecure people, but they wear a mask of a tough criminal. And that's where Hisaishi's music comes in. It tells us how the characters really feel. Kitano's performance makes Murakawa look like an angry, closed-off individual, but what the music's saying is that Murakawa is actually a vulnerable, passionate person. What's important though, is that he doesn't know how to access that side of himself anymore. He's closed himself off for so long, he doesn't know how to express himself. Sonatine's whole structure as a film is based on exploring that one idea. The idea that some people have closed themselves off from being vulnerable for so long that the idea of taking responsibility is actually far scarier than just committing to it for the rest of your life. More than anything, Sonatine is a movie about regret. As you've probably worked out, Sonatine isn't like a regular Yakuza crime movie, but it definitely starts that way. It has all of the tropes you'd expect from a Yakuza thing. People in blazes, people yelling, backroom deals, protection money, explosions, gambling, karaoke. Okay, maybe not that last one, but it's still pretty Yakuza-y. All of this crime stuff is set up in the first 30 minutes. You get this detailed picture of what Murakawa's life is like. The boredom of doing the same things over and over, hanging around with people you fundamentally can't understand. You don't actually know them, but they're Yakuza, right? So you call them brothers. And then as all of this is swirling around in Murakawa's head, something changes. He gets attacked. After getting ambushed, several members of Murakawa's group die, and the rest who survive immediately start driving out of town. The whole time this is going on, a person is bleeding out in the backseat of their car. They've just given up control over their own part of town, and to be brutal, they're running away. No matter how you look at it, this is a bad situation. But then, Hisaishi's music kicks in again. And you see this shot, the car that's transporting all of them. It's the only light available in the dark. And the two of them together make it feel more like a glimmer of hope on the horizon. Because for Murakawa, death isn't the end. He spends every single day surrounded by it. Instead, this is an opportunity for rebirth. In fact, the whole movie basically gets rebirthed at this point. Instead of the boring, grey, dull city, we get this. We get miles of sea, tons of open sky, and silence. That's the magic of Sonatine. It just changes what movie it is halfway. It wouldn't work nearly as well if it didn't completely commit to the Yakuza stuff initially. It's the kind of creative risk only somebody already established as a celebrity could take. I mean, think about it. If it didn't work, the whole movie would have basically been ruined. And this is what makes Kitano's early work so incredible to me. He takes these genres that are so cleanly defined and have such a big history, you know? Things like the Yakuza movie, the cop movie, and then he uses them as backdrops to explore the characters in his films. That's what he's actually interested in. Let's just look at this one scene from Sonatine where a guy gets attacked. He pulls out a knife to stab someone, and as soon as he does, a group of people run over and start pounding the shit out of the guy. When the knife connects, the film cuts to this shot of people just really not giving a shit about what's happening. When it finally cuts back, the shot really only shows the guy suffering, while a bunch of people outside of the frame are beating the crap out of the other guy. This guy goes so hard his shoe comes off. Nobody actually cares about who's been hurt, they just want to deal out more violence. It still feels really brutal, but Kitano doesn't try to over-sensationalize the violence. He actually cuts away from it. And this is how violence is shown throughout the whole of Sonatine. There's never any build-up or tension leading to it, and the reaction to it is always super understated. Kitano's performance as Murakawa is played so straight, with such little emotion, that it ends up amplifying the effect of the violence. It always feels so big because Kitano's not reacting. He kinda just stares at that shit like he's a Shinigami from Death Note. Every time you see violence in Sonatine, it's always shown in a particular way. It's always in POV shots. It's pretty rare the film actually focuses on who's doing the violence. All you really get are these isolated moments of it, and they're clearly all from somebody's perspective. What it ends up doing is highlighting the spectacle of the violence. People are always looking and taking it in. It makes the violence cool. But more than that, it makes Kitano's use of violence feel metaphorical to me, like there's some other meaning to it. In the book The Cinema of Takeshi Kitano, Flowering Blood, Sean Redmond writes this sentence that really helped me understand Kitano's films. As Elaine Scarry has noted, violence is a threat to language in its world-making and sense-making possibility, because the body's pain is inexpressible in speech and words. The way I interpret that is the violence in Kitano's films has to be conveying something that we just can't put into words, because the act of violence itself doesn't use logic. You can't apply rules to violence, it exists outside of them. And similarly, in the book Beat Takeshi vs. Takeshi Kitano, Casio Abe describes Murakawa as a guy who feels like he's already dead. But this makes the moments of violence in Sonatine feel passionate, like they're bursting with a natural energy, in direct contrast to how still the rest of the film is. It's like the violence is giving the characters a way to express themselves, but it's always only the exact moment the violence happens that it feels like this. For Kitano, it's as if the act of violence itself is a work of art. It's never the events leading up to it, it's never the events following it, but the exact moment the bullet hits. This is Chris Burden. He's 25 years old here. And this is a loaded .22 caliber rifle. It's aimed directly at Burden's arm and held 15 feet away by one of his friends. Despite what it looks like, this is actually an art piece. Wait, I don't think I explained that correctly. This is an art piece, and someone is filming it. But this is a sculpture. As soon as the clock hits 7:45 p.m., Burden is about to actually get shot. On purpose. And even though that rifle is aimed to slightly graze past his arm, that bullet is about to miss, enter, and go straight through it instead. This is the literal definition of a crime film. For Burden, the art isn't this 8-second long movie, the art is the act of getting shot.
And in your mind, that was the sculpture, the result of you being shot?
No, just the moment when I was getting shot was the sculpture. Just that instant when the bullet traveled from the gun into my arm.
Burden called this piece of art Shoot, and he had this to say about it. We see people being shot on TV, we read about it in the newspaper, everybody has wondered what it's like, so I did it. Burden was infamous for positioning pain and violence as the center focus for all of his art installations. He crawled over glass, he crucified himself to a Volkswagen, and in one example, he sent a group of people to the 3rd floor of a building and then showed them live footage of him setting the ground floor on fire. Burden's art brought into question what could be considered art. Could suffering? And what existing relationship did people have with violence? Violence is clearly present in our day-to-day lives enough that we're surrounded by it. It's in our news, it's in our games, it's in our movies, but we don't really consciously think of violence in that way. In other words, Burden's art changed the conversation around violence. It went from violence is a thing that happens to us to how do we process violence when it's become this normalized? And if you look at Kitano's work through this framework, it starts to reveal a lot more of itself. In the production notes for another one of Kitano's movies, Outrage, he said, "I intentionally shoot violence to make the audience feel real pain. I have never, and I will never, shoot violence as if it's some kind of action video game." And I don't think he means only like the physical act of violence when he says that. Kitano's movies are routinely filled with characters that are defined by their relationship to violence. Whether it's being haunted by a violent history, or having death as a concept just hanging over them, Kitano's characters repeatedly confront their own mortality. But my favorite movie where Kitano does this is called Hana-bi. On the surface, Hana-bi is another violent Yakuza cop movie. But is it? Hana-bi actually starts with a violent event that goes on to define its two main characters. Kitano plays Nishi and Ren Osugi plays Harabe. They're both police officers who were involved in a major arrest attempt that went horribly wrong. People died, Nishi got forced into an early retirement, but Harabe isn't as lucky and ends up paralyzed because of the event. Pretty much the whole of Hana-bi is about how Nishi and Harabe start to navigate life after this. Nishi's wife has a terminal health condition and he needs money to look after her, so he starts borrowing it from the Yakuza. And Harabe's story? It's about learning to grow past the accident and realize it doesn't have to define him. It is not the type of thing you'd expect to see in a Yakuza film, but this is Takeshi Kitano we're talking about. Plus, you know Hana-bi is good because even Roger Ebert, the David Cage of movies, gave it a thumbs up. Still rated it lower than what he gave Space Jam though, Okay, Hana-bi did well critically in Japan too. It didn't make a lot of money, but it made people realize Kitano was an actual filmmaker, not just a TV comedian messing about with films. There's a well-respected Japanese film magazine called Kinema Junpo. It's like the Japanese Sight and Sound, and they called Hana-bi the best film of 1999. And that was a stacked year. That's the same year as Gerow, which is another Kitano movie, and it was the same year as Taboo, which Kitano acted in. How does he find time to make all this stuff? He was hosting 7 weekly shows when Hana-bi came out.
Currently appearing in, get this, 7 weekly television shows.
There's a scene about a third of the way through Hana-bi that I think is one of the best things I've seen in any film. At this point in the movie, Kitano's character really needs money, so he's decided to rob a bank. And the scene is entirely based around taking this old taxi and transforming it into a police car. Any other director would have made this an incredibly straightforward scene. How does Kitano do it? He turns it into a metaphor about our relationship with creating art. I'm serious. The scene starts with Kitano spray painting the car, but about 10 seconds in, the film cuts away from him to show Hanabi looking at these tulips, and it goes into his perspective to show you them up close. Then the movie cuts to the same flower, but now rendered inside a painting and merged with a cat's head. That cut from the flower to the eye is doing so much heavy lifting here, because it means Hanabi looking at the tulips and the final painting are both connected. He's taken his own life experience and used it to make new art. That's crazy. It somehow says that with a single cut. And the scene doesn't end there. It actually rotates through a bunch of paintings that Hanabi's made. They're all things that can't exist naturally. They're living, breathing creatures that have been merged with flowers. The way I interpret this is that Hanabi's paintings allow him to process the world around him and take control of it. Art isn't just a form of expression, it speaks back to you. It helps you understand the world. There wasn't a piece of art in the room before, and now there is. There's something that we can emotionally connect with and interpret meaning from, and Hanabi brought it into existence. There's something really affirming about this scene. I can't speak for anyone else, but whenever I try and make stuff, I don't find it easy, no matter how many times I do it. There isn't a step-by-step guidebook for how to make good art or anything like that. Every time I do this, it feels like I'm just rolling the dice. And the world is so nonsensical and punishing and doesn't follow any rules. It's like I have a violent relationship with myself when it comes to making art. But at the same time, making art isn't supposed to be easy. You're literally creating something that didn't exist before. If it's difficult, it means you're doing something cool and new. So when I get out there and I make anything at all, it gives me back some control over the world. I can look back at the things I've made and say, I did that. I brought that into existence. I really love that. What took this scene over the top for me was finding out Takeshi Kitano painted all of these paintings himself. In 1994, the year after Sonatine came out, Kitano had an almost fatal motorcycle accident, one that paralyzed half his face and he had to have major surgery and spent several months recovering. While undergoing treatment, Kitano took up painting as a hobby, and it's one that he still does today. For him to take his own trauma and put it inside of a film is just incredible to me. That's a level of vulnerability I'm not at yet, but hopefully someday. The final thing I want to mention about Kitano's films is that they're extremely funny. I know I've just talked about how tortured Kitano really is, but I think it's important to remember that this guy was and is a stand-up comedian. This is like the 4th time I've mentioned it, but he made Takeshi's Castle, man. It's easy to read Kitano's work as pessimistic or overly negative or, and I hate this word, nihilistic, but I think the truth is, they're actually celebrations of life. If Sonatine has any message, it's that it takes a lot more courage to believe in something than it does to believe in nothing. In March 2010, when promoting an art exhibition of his paintings, Kitano said this in an interview: "Humor is like violence. They both come to you unexpectedly, and the more unpredictable they both are, the better it gets. That's how it works. If somebody slips on a banana, it's funnier if it's someone high up, like a king or an emperor, than if it's an ordinary man. So this demonic character is shared between comedy and violence. They both lurk in the most unpredictable moments." Kitano's use of violence forces you to take his stories more seriously. A violent thing could happen at any moment, and it could have a huge influence on the rest of the story. It makes you pay attention to every single tiny action. If someone's death can hang over the rest of the story, so can a smile. So can a pair of tulips. What makes Kitano's movie so special is that he's incredible at capturing the smaller things in life, those beautiful moments between the parts we remember, the moments where we actually live. It could be a photograph that doesn't go to plan, or just hanging around with friends. It's those moments of undeniable connection that are otherwise impossible to put into words. Kitano's movies exist as reminders that while life can be tough and lonely and terrifying, those good moments don't stop existing either. And if you change your perspective, there's always something beautiful around you in life. It all has to end eventually. It could happen at any moment. So why not make the most of it? Yo, it's Jay. If you enjoyed the video and you'd like to help me make similar stuff, I have a Patreon. For $1, you get access to the Discord where you could talk about whatever this channel is about at this point. For $5, you get access to commentaries on every video I've ever made. I talk about the response to the video, my process of making them, and just generally ideas I've had to cut from the finished thing. You can also send in questions on the Patreon and I'll try answer them in the next one. I also host a movie podcast with my mate Colin called Labyrinth of Cinema. The last episode was on a super sick Hong Kong action movie called Iron Monkey. Really good, by the way. And if you want to talk to me, you can hit me up on Twitter at @j. As always, I'd like to thank the patrons for letting me make this stuff. But this week, I'd like to especially thank Akira Game Dev, Big Lou, The Scanny Man, Mox Bagel, New Church, P-Cell, The Fragrance of Dark Coffee, and Vague Type. Thank you so much. See you next time. By the way, apparently Mr. Beast has his own version of Takeshi's Castle.